Hello friends and welcome to this video on Authentic English, and today we will discuss the poem Darkling Thrush by Thomas Hardy. But before we begin, I would like you to subscribe to my channel if you like the videos and hit the bell icon next to it, because that way you're going to be notified about all the videos that I upload to this channel. And I'm thinking about uploading all the poems for the ISC board on my channel this time. So today we're going to discuss the poem Darkling Thrush, the Darkling Thrush by Thomas Hardy. Now, first of all, let's talk a little about Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy was born in England. He was an English poet, was deeply influenced by Romanticism. A romantic movement in England, was a phase that we study in English literature. Romanticism means when poets started talking about nature, and all the beautiful things, especially about nature. There was a growing concern about nature in their poetry, and that is what we call Romanticism, So William Wordsworth, Keats, and in fact Byron, and all of these famous poets are romantic poets. So although Thomas Hardy wrote much after the romantic movement got ended in England, he was still influenced a lot by it. His literary work criticizes Victorian England and touches upon the unhappiness in people's life. So what Thomas Hardy writes basically talks about how, people suffered in England during the reign of Queen Victoria, and how England was not good, and he was deeply pained by seeing all the problems that existed in England at that time, during the time he wrote. And so his work is mostly, serious and unhappy. Overall, his poetry features tragic elements. So his poetry is also about grave elements and, things like that. Things which are, not very happy. Actually, during the time of Queen Victoria, during the Victorian England faced a lot of problems, like people could not get properly educated. And then Thomas Hardy also witnessed the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution caused people a lot of pollution. People started, losing faith in religion. People became like robots, and everything was like very automatic, and people were very far off from nature, because nature was just, trees were cut down in large numbers. There was a lot of pollution and everything was bad. So Thomas Hardy was definitely not a fan of modernity. They were moving towards a better phase, but Thomas Hardy did not like all of that. The Darkling Thrush, originally titled By the Century's Deathbed, 1900, was included in the collection Poems of the Past and Present. So the original title was By the Century's Deathbed. So in this poem, the 19th century is coming to an end and the 20th century is beginning. So, what happens in the poem is that the poet Thomas Hardy is standing in a woodland, an open areas covered with a few trees and all of that stuff. So he's standing near a woodland and he observes everything that he sees around him. He's able to infer that everything around him is dull and gray. It is winter, of course. It's the time of December. So this entire year, century, everything is coming to an end. 19th century is coming to an end and the 20th century is going to begin. So he's observing everything. He's saying that everything is winter bitten. Everything seems grey, dull and unhappy. There is no person to be seen in the poem. So he's kind of, beginning the poem on a very depressing note, that there is nobody to see, nobody to love. All that he can see is the frost-bitten woodland. The poet talks about how a bird singing in a dull and dark atmosphere where everything seems gloomy shows a rays of happiness to the poet. But then, after observing how depressing the environment where he is, he hears the voice of a bird. The bird is a thrush. A thrush is a bird like a nightingale which can sing loudly. So he sees a very weak thrush singing loudly in that gloomy atmosphere. He wonders why the thrush is singing when nobody is there to hear him. He's actually there to hear him, and maybe the thrush is singing, you can say, to give the poet a ray of hope. So by listening to the singing of the thrush, Thomas Hardy is able to, gather some hope that, yeah, there is some reason to make joy, there is some reason to be joyful about, although the poet or the speaker is unaware of it. Okay, so he doesn't know what that reason is, but there definitely is some reason to be happy about. Okay, so in this way, this poem, gives a message of hope that every cloud has a silver lining, in that kind of a way. It is unclear whether our speaker stops feeling gloomy or not, but just by listening to the thrush, he gives us and also to himself a sign of hope. Okay? Maybe in the 20th century, that is the century to come, 19th century is ending and 20th century is coming, and maybe in the 20th century, things are going to get better. Okay? This is what we can imply by this. So this is what is going to happen in the poem The Darkling Thrush by Thomas Hardy. Now, Thomas Hardy, talks about the death of the century in a way, and probably it can be inferred that Thomas Hardy was definitely not happy with what was happening in the 19th century. Okay, why was he not happy? Because of course I told you about the industrial revolution in England. Industrial revolution in England left a lot of pollution. Okay, people started working with machines. They lost their touch with religion, with nature. Okay, they start becoming automatons. And then religion was also a major concern. People started losing faith in religion in the 19th century. Okay, so this is all what troubled Thomas Hardy, and that is why, when we read the poem, we find out that he's not very happy with what all happened in the 19th century, and that is why he begins the poem on a depressing note. However, when the thrush sings, he gives the poem to the speaker and also to the readers, if we can find it, some hope that the future can be better. Written in the end of the 19th century, this poem by Hardy compares the grey winter atmosphere of his surroundings to the copse of the century. Okay, when the landscape of the woodland, which is all dull, dark, and grey, is compared to the copse of the 19th century. The poet says that the 19th century is lying dead. Okay, and that corpse is compared to the grey winter atmosphere. Everything seems bad, grey, dull. And what the poet does is say that this landscape is just like the corpse of the 19th century. It's like the century is dead. However, then each ending signifies a new beginning, and we know that 20th century is there, and perhaps the singing of the thrush signifies this new beginning. Okay, but there is a little hope in the 20th century, and this is what we can infer by the poem. The singing of the thrush can signify the beginning of the new century, a new beginning. Every cloud has a silver lining. Think about that. Hardy wasn't a fan of modernity, what I was telling you. In the 19th century, which is about to end, people lost faith in religion, and the Industrial Revolution made people automatons. People became very robo-like. They were working in factories, mills. There was no time for religion, no time for, things like nature and enjoying the beauty of natural things. There was pollution and all sorts of problems, and Hardy doesn't like it. Hence, he conveys depressing imagery about all that he sees around him. Okay, so there is a lot of depressing imagery just because of that, because he's pained to see how people are changing, how people are losing their touch with God and nature. Things like these trouble poets a lot, and this is happening even today. The more we use machines, the more we are, losing touch with nature and things like that. The Song of the Thrush brings in some hope that the coming century may be better, or there simply exists some hope. Okay, the Song of the Thrush can signify a lot of things. There is a reason to have hope that things can get better, and that the speaker can find some happiness. He just needs to search for it. It's somewhere, maybe inside him. Okay. So let's begin the stanza-wise explanation of the poem. It's a very simple poem. It just seems a bit difficult, and what is actually difficult to comprehend is the theme. Okay, rest the poem is easy. I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre grey, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. The tangled vine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. So first of all, let's look at the word meanings. Coppice means an area of woodland. Okay, so the poet is leaning upon a gate, okay, that opens to the woodland. Okay, so he's leaning upon a gate. He's in a very thinking posture. He's just observing everything that is around him. Okay, he's observing the woodland. So in a woodland, the poet is leaning upon a gate that opens into it. When frost was spectre grey, notice the capital F. Frost is, personified. So the frost was spectre grey. Spectre is a word for ghost. So the frost was ghostly grey. The frost, is compared to a ghost. And that is why there is a capital F in it. As if frost is very important. Spectre grey, landscape is grey and eerie like a ghost. So the entire landscape, all that he can see around him, is very grey, dull, gloomy. So there is a lot of depressing imagery. And winter, again, winter is also personified. The things, that are bringing in all the gloominess are personified. They are extremely important. And winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. Okay? And the leftovers of winters, whatever remaining winter was there, made desolate, made everything look miserable, made desolate the weakening eye of day. They hid the sun. The sun could not be seen in the sky. And the sun was weakening. That is, the day was coming to an end. It is the time of the twilight, you can think. And the sun is going to, die as the atmosphere is very dark and grey. The sun could already not be seen clearly. Okay? The tangled vine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres. Now, the vines, okay? The stems of the trees that were intertwined with each other, they projected across the sky like strings of broken lyres. So lyre was an ancient U-shaped string instrument, especially used during the Greek times, okay? So that was a lyre, and the lyre is said to be broken. There is no music anywhere around. The vine stems are all covering the sky. So you can see that the atmosphere is ghostly, the atmosphere is miserable, the atmosphere is all depressing. And all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. And all people who lived nearby had sought their household fire, were in their houses. There was no one around, okay? There is no life anywhere. All the people that lived nearby, nigh means something that is nearby, that haunted nigh, and all mankind that haunted nigh, okay? Look at the word haunted. Haunted means, a characteristic of a ghost. So even the people who lived nearby are said to be, haunting the scenery. So do people actually haunt it, or people live? That is the question. But here the poet says that all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. So everybody who lived around was not there to be seen. And it was completely deserted. It was a completely deserted place. You can imagine it. Just trees, snow, frost. Not the beautiful snow. Everything was winter bitten, very bad looking. It is not like, you've read that poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. It's not a beautiful thing that attracts the eyes and makes you stop by to admire it. It's exactly the opposite. It's something very bad, very dull. Look at how frost and winter are personified, because these are the things that make the scenery what it is, okay? They make everything look gloomy, depressing, and unsatisfying. So this was the explanation of the stanza, but we also need to discuss the meaning of the word darkling. Now, darkling is not a modern word. It's an old word which reminds us of darkness, okay? Darkling means something that is related to darkness. Now, when we talk about darkling in the title of the poem itself, it gives us very depressing, it gives us a very depressing feel. Darkling, okay? Darkness, gloominess, ignorance, things like that. And then we have this bird known as the thrush. Now, thrush is a nightingale-like bird, and this bird is something that is associated with the darkness. Now, this bird is going to sing out in the darkness. Probably, it's going to remove the darkness in certain senses. Now, the first two paragraphs of the poem we can note are the ones where depression, gloominess, etc. are highlighted. In the last two stanzas, we see that they are juxtaposed with the opposite thing. There is a sign of hope and happiness. Here what we see is depression, sadness, and gloominess. In the last two stanzas, the poet will give us messages of hope, of happiness, etc. The poet stands by a gate in the woodland in a reflecting mood. All he sees is a dismal, winter-bitten landscape of Britain. No person can be seen around as everyone is in their houses and there seems to be no sign of life. Okay, there is no life. The place is deserted. The strings of the lyres are broken and no music is in the ambience, and a classical reference. Now you can see that this poem makes a lot of classical references. This lyre is an ancient instrument of the Greek mythology, and so this is a classical reference. The strings of the lyres are okay. Frost and winter are personified. You can see that frost and winter are personified, and all in all, this poem also, is influenced by romanticism. There is a talk about nature, although the nature is not shown to be very beautiful. There is, somebody who's talking about nature. Frost and winter are personified as they are things whose presence kind of makes the scenario what it is. It's like frost and winter are two people who present there to make the scenario look haunting, gloomy, and stuff like that. Also, the word darkling reminds us of poets like Keats. So Keats has used the word darkling in some of his poems. Now Keats was a writer who wrote much before him. Okay, not much before him. Thomas Hardy wrote. So in a certain sense, Hardy is referring to Keats, and this poem is like a reference to Ode to a Nightingale. And Keats also wrote a poem known as Ode to a Nightingale, and this entire poem can be a reference to it. If you're interested, you can read the poem Ode to a Nightingale along with its summary. It's going to be available on the internet quite easily, and you can read it, and in your answers you can compare the two poems. So Keats was a poet who wrote before him, and this poem can be considered a reference to it. Nightingale is the bird, just like the thrush. Okay, so we have the thrush in it. That is why the two poems become similar, and so we can say that there is a mention of the poet Keats. The speaker is in a gloomy mood, and as are the surroundings, as everything he sees is joyless and lifeless. So everything that he can see seems to be joyless and hopeless. You can link this that he's not very happy with what happened in the 19th century. He is in a very sad mood, like the century is coming to an end, and everything that happened in it was kind of depressing for him. So this is a background kind of thing. There is no direct mention of it in the poem. This is just in the background that he was depressed by the Industrial Revolution and stuff like that. But in the poem, if you just want to concern yourself with the poem, there is nothing like that. It's simply that the atmosphere is grey and dull and very lifeless and gloomy, and it's going to be the end of the century, and there is no happiness that is going to be there on New Year and stuff like that. All that the poet can think of is joylessness and lifelessness. Okay, let's move on to paragraph number 2. The land's sharp features seem to me the century's copse outlent, its crypt the cloudy canopy, the wind its death lament. The ancient pearls of German birth was shrunken hard and dry, and every spirit upon earth seemed fervorless as I. Now in this stanza again, the poet goes on to describe the landscape that he sees, and there is a nice comparison here. The land's sharp features seemed to me. The speaker says that the sharp outlines of the landscape that he's able to see, the dull and gloomy landscape, its outlines remind him of the corpse of the ending century. The century is ending, and the speaker says that this century that is dying, it seems to me like it's just like the landscape. Okay, so the gloomy landscape is compared to the corpse of the century's corpse outlined. It seemed to him that this entire landscape that he can visualize in front of his eyes is the dead body of the century. Okay, outstretched. Outlent means outstretched, that is stretched out, lying on the ground, completely straightly. So the features of the land are compared, the landscape is compared to the dead body of the century. It script the cloudy canopy, and the sky was like the burial place of the corpse, the tomb that will cover it. The wind its death lament, and the sound of the wind is like the song grieving the death of the century. So you can see that there is a nice comparison here. Now, one thing can be noted, like it's so poetic, it's so literary, it's so rhyming and all, and it's talking about such a grave issue. These two things contrast with each other, but still they exist. Okay, you're talking about such grave issues like death and sadness, but still you have time to compare things like these, and so this is something that you can note and you can make a mention of it in your answers. So the landscape was like the dead body of the century. The dead body of the century, of course, reminds us, the landscape has already been told to us, was depressing and sad, gray, ghost like. So that is why it's compared to the ghost, the corpse of the century. The corpse of the century, what kind of feelings does it, cause to people? The corpse of the century makes the poet sad, makes the poet gloomy and lifeless. Okay, it's crypt, the cloudy canopy. Crypt is the burial place or the tomb. The cloudy canopy, and canopy is the ornamental cloth. So the sky is compared to the tomb where the dead body of the century will be buried, and the wind, its death lament. And the wind is like a song lamenting its death. The ancient pulse of German birth was shrunken hard and die. The force of life from which things and creatures grow was dry. Okay, the seeds that can form a new plant were all dry. So there is no sign of life, of birth, of fertility. Everything is dry, dull, and going to die. So there is a lot of death imagery, a lot of talk about death here. And every spirit upon earth seemed fervorless as I. And every person, you can mark that he uses the word spirit, that, in order to tell us about a darkness, about, a sadness which is kind of very deep, a spiritual sadness. And every spirit upon earth seemed fervorless as I. And everybody he could see around him was, kind of unhappy. So this is all what the poet has to say in this paragraph. Now let's move ahead. At once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overhead, in full limp-hearted even song of joy limited. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt and small, with blast beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. Now what happens here is that suddenly, while being in such a sad mood, the speaker hears the song of a thrush. Now thrush, as I told you, is a bird. At once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overhead. Okay, the gloomy twigs that were overhead, amongst them, okay, was a thrush who was sitting and singing very loudly in a full-hearted even song. The thrush was singing, so the speaker could hear the voice of the thrush, and he compares the song of the thrush with an even song. Now even song are songs that are sung for the service of God. Okay, they are like prayers. So you can see that the thrush brings in the religion. As I told you before, that he was saddened by the fact that in the 19th century people lost hope in religion, and now you can see that the song of the bird is compared to a prayer, that is a religious song of joy illimited. Now the song is bringing unlimited joy to the speaker. Okay, the song is very joyful. The song of the thrush, the thrush is singing very joyfully of joy illimited. Now illimited can signify such great joy that cannot be even formed into words. That is why he does not use the typical and the common word unlimited. Illimited is not a word, he invents it, probably to signify the joy that emanates from the song of the thrush is so amazing. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt and small. Now he describes the thrush. Now there is a description of the thrush who is singing the song. The thrush is described to be frail. Frail means weak. Gaunt is thin and small. The thrush isn't a very nice and perfect bird. The thrush is also kind of old, weak we can comprehend that the thrush may not survive a lot longer. With blast beruffled plume, now the feathers of the bird are disordered by the strong winds that are blowing there. So the thrush is not looking very pretty. The thrush is not looking amazing. The thrush looks kind of, shabby. The thrush isn't described to be beautiful. You have to mark this. The thrush is described to look, kind of sad, depressed. Not sad exactly. The thrush is described to look ugly. Ugly in the sense that he's not a perfect thrush, like a perfect bird. But in spite of not being so well, the thrush is singing with all his power. The thrush is singing with all the power that he has. With blast beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul. Now fling means to throw or exert. Now with all his soul, with all his might, he was singing the song, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom, in that gloomy atmosphere where no one was there to hear him. The speaker hears a thrush singing, a thrush who doesn't look great. She is weak and thin, but in this wintry landscape, she chooses to sing a song with all her energy. The speaker wonders the cause of the song in such a gloomy atmosphere. The speaker wonders. We'll clearly find this mentioned in the next paragraph, in the next stanza, that why is the thrush singing? The thrush has been able to survive the harsh winter and sings. Okay, he's not dead in the winter. And probably by looking at this description, we may infer that the thrush wouldn't survive a lot longer. The song of the thrush does bring in some joy that clashes with the dreary atmosphere that the speaker described in the last two stanzas. Now here, there is a contrast with what happened in the last two stanzas. The song of the thrush is described to be, joyful. And in the last two paragraphs, what we, read was that everything looked very desolate, very miserable. The song of the thrush is compared with the song sung in the service of God. Okay? So it's like the thrush is bringing in all the nature, all the beauty, and all the religion back into the picture. And it is opposite of what happened in the 19th century when people lost faith in religion, and God is one of the reasons why the poet finds modernity miserable. So as I told you before, all of this, together with the industrial revolution in England that made people robot-like, the thrush brings music and harmony in the picture. Okay? There was no harmony. The lyres were broken in the last two stanzas, and now the song of the thrush brings music into the picture. Perhaps the weak thrush can dry soon, but nevertheless it chooses to sing and be joyful. So, clearly, the thrush is not very, well-to-do, but in spite of that, in spite of all the gloom that is there, the thrush chooses to sing and sing with all his might. So little cause for carolings of such ecstatic sound was written on terrestrial things afar and nigh around, that I could think there tremble through his happy good night air some blessed hope whereof he knew, and I was unaware. So here, carolings means singing, ecstatic is happy, was written on terrestrial things of the landscape. Nigh again means near. So let's go through this paragraph. So the speaker says, so little cause for carolings. There was no cause for singing. There was nobody to hear the thrush. He wonders why he was singing. There was gloom all around. It was all dark, dismal and grey. So there was no, reason for the thrush to sing of such ecstatic sound, and that too sing so happily, was written on terrestrial things afar and nigh around. There was nothing in the atmosphere, far or nearby. Okay? There was nothing in the landscape, far or nearby, that could give, at least to the poet, a reason to be joyful, to sing, or to be merry. So he clearly wonders, why was the thrush singing when there was no reason to be happy? When all that the landscape had to offer was dark, grey, and dismal imagery. But I could think there trembled through his happy good night air some blessed hope whereof he knew, and I was unaware. And now, in the last 4 lines, he says, there definitely was some hope that emanated through his song. Some hope that the bird knew, but the poet was not aware about. So the poem ends here, and with the note, there was some hope that the thrush knew about, but of which the poet, the speaker, was unaware. Speaker wonders the reason for this ecstatic song by the thrush. He sees no cause of joy nearby or afar. However, he then concludes there must be some reason of hope that is known to the thrush and the speaker is unaware of it. Okay, there is actually a reason to be happy, but he does not know that. The speaker somewhere sees some hope. The 20th century can be a bit better, is what we can infer. Perhaps we can think that there is a message, that the upcoming times can be better. The speaker wonders how he can see that happiness too. And the speaker definitely ponders over the fact, okay, that what is the cause of that happiness. Probably that happiness lies within him. So, this poem ends on a happy note. Okay? Talks about why or how one can find happiness. When everything around gives you a reason to cry or be sorrowful about, you need to see that thing that gives you a reason to be happy. And the thrush is doing the same purpose here in the poem. Now, does the poet become happy after, seeing the thrush or not is another thing, but we can definitely say that the thrush gives hope to the poet, hope to be happy. So this was the poem The Darkling Thrush by Thomas Hardy. If you come across any questions that you would like answers to, please post them in the comments below. I'm going to answer all the questions, and I would request you to subscribe to my channel so that you can have explanations for the other poems that I'm going to upload soon on my channel. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.